I think for my entire life, I've been engaged in all sorts of different, what people call fandoms, based on different like intellectual properties, whether it be like video games, movies, or TV shows. I think it's something that I think has been part of my life for my entire life. I mean, there's not really much of a difference between like just enjoying it and being in a fandom, I would say. I think if you're in a fandom, it's something that there kind of is like you're super engaged with it as compared to like some other piece of media you would consume and just like, oh, that was cool, and then you just move on. I actually kind of tend to do it a lot for series that I initially get into. For like, I'll think of an example like Spyro, for instance, the video game about the dragon. Sometimes you get out of a community for a while and you just lose your passion for it for like whatever amount of time, and then you get back into it because you move on to something else. Like when I first got into Spyro, I was into it big time, but then Raya and the Last Dragon came out in like 2021, and that kind of like stole my attention away from Spyro for a while. And I was doing like art, and I was getting all the merchandise and stuff, and then I suddenly realized I don't really care about Spyro that much at the moment, and I just kind of left that community. But then there's some communities that you just never leave, and those communities for me would be like Alpha and Omega, Lion King, Jurassic Park, etc., or like even Star Wars, especially Alpha and Omega, because I probably wouldn't have half of the online friends I have right now if it weren't for me being into that movie. And I wouldn't say it's a spectacular movie, but it's one of my favorites. My passion for that movie kind of led to me making a whole online community on this app called Amino for it. And I've been doing it for years, and I've made so many friends, and I've talked to so many people about it, and it's been a pretty cool time overall. I'm one of those people that is very like, yeah, internet friends are real friends. We've made a bunch of fan works about the movie, from like animations to like fan art. It's really fun stuff, and when minds come together, a lot of things can come out of that. Even some of it can be even better than what the professional like people have made. And I think on some levels, some fans have actually accomplished that, because I mean, in the specific case of Alpha and Omega, I mean, it's not really a compelling story to like really begin with, but I think people who are passionate about it can like make something really good out of that. My favorite fandom experience, I think it was in 2017. They had this Star Wars thing at the Citizens Bank Park. The whole gist about that is they have a bunch of people show up dressed as Star Wars characters, and they invite like regular people to show up dressed as characters, and a bunch of people did, and so did I. I was dressed full out as Director Krennic from Rogue One. I had the full costume. It was like $200. I had the hat, I had the gloves. It was really cool, even the cape. I saw some woman dressed as Jyn Erso, and I was like, yo. I'm not really the best at art, but I love looking at like different pictures, and I love seeing the how talented people can make, even when they're drawing like a minor character in a movie. And I think the best example of this would be the Lion King fandom. There are so many awesome like fan comic stories that artists have like made, trying to fill in the gaps in the movies. My favorite would probably have to be I forgot the artist's name, but they did a comic series about the hyenas who are my favorite characters from the movie. It's a super sad comic, but it's got a lot of heart to it, and I think that's the most important part. As long as you're super passionate and you like care about the subject matter, and you're not trying to do some kind of ulterior motives around it, I think you can make something work out of that, and I think you'll get a lot of people like saying that's pretty cool.
I think there's a certain expectation with being a part of fandom where you have to interact with people. And that's not always the case, but there's definitely a small pressure to, at least. So if you're casually viewing it, then you don't have to necessarily involve yourself with the community. But I think a lot of people, including myself, can find a lot of like-minded people through being a part of different fandoms and interacting with other people. Fandom gave me a good place to start drawing. It was a huge inspiration when I was still like learning to draw, and it got me really interested in, okay, how does this form work? I find that when I'm looking for inspiration, I do look at a lot of fan pieces that are done, but because that's not so much of a central part of my art. I don't necessarily make a lot of fan art anymore, but fandom still exists in the way that I interact with media and think about the way that themes carry out throughout work. A lot of like themes from things like Steven Universe comes into my work, and I find myself drawing a lot of inspiration from media like that because of the overarching themes that I find connect to my existence. A lot of times I'd find that I'd draw something because I said that to a friend and then they got excited, like, oh, I'm going to draw this picture of like this character from a show. And then they would be like, cool, I can't wait to see it. But now it's more about just drawing and picking up a pencil, and it's less about like recreating those characters and more about what those characters might have represented and how I can use them in my own work. I think the closest I ever got to being like on a media site was on Google+, which is such an archaic like platform now. I view a lot of webtoons now, which is a webcomics like site, which has a lot of different fandoms within it, but also anyone can publish things on there. They'll feature creators, so it's up and coming artists who are continuing to create their work. So being able to look at all of the different styles and watch a bunch of artists grow throughout this platform has been a really positive experience for me, and one that's very different from my youth. I think finding that sense of community is really important, and it impacted me in a very positive way when I was younger. Just being able to have a group of people that all came together for the purpose of like expressing themselves, I think was a really great experience.
You know, once I got on the World Wide Web in 1994, late 93, early 94, yeah, probably, you very quickly found your kind of kindred spirits out there that were into the things that you were into. And even by then, things like Nintendo, you know, by then the Super Nintendo, the Genesis were out, stuff like that. So things like that were already kind of retro. We didn't quite use those words yet, but you'd find people that were like, yeah, I played The Legend of Zelda also. And it's like, yeah, cool, right. You know, people that I'm still friends with 30 years later to this day, that you kind of grouped up with in that way. And I think that that shared experience, you know, particularly if you're not a popular person, you're not a very social person, you know, video games are a way to have that kind of shared expression like that. I was a very non-social person. I mean, I still am, but like as a child, video games was something that really was a reason to be with other people and have shared experiences. And I got very good at role-playing games and of taking notes from games. I think one of the reasons why I became a better student later was coming from video games. And those experiences, I think, really formulated a lot of the kind of critical thinking skills that I have that I don't think I was necessarily getting in school, but I was getting from discovering how like the systems in a video game worked. I think it's always, you know, funner to be able to play with friends. You know, for example, I was playing Halo last night with a couple of friends. One of them just got Halo Infinite, so they're hopping into the multiplayer. So they just pinged me on my Xbox and I hopped into a game with them. I think that it's funner to do things like that, to work with people, to have shared experiences like that. I think that we overthink that these days. I think it's very consumerist. The way that people talk about being fans of things, they think of it in a very consumerist way of, I own things. So it's not enough to have a Nintendo Switch. It's you've got to have this and that and this and that, and people think of it in that way. I think it's enough just to like something. I don't think you really need the merch. I mean, it's fine to have the merch. You know, being a fan of something just means that you're showing some kind of support towards it.
It's really hard to tell if you're obsessed with something because there's you and then there's what everyone else kind of thinks. Like, I think when you start to go too far is when you let your fandom like start to dictate how you like treat other people on like a human level.
It becomes obsession when it's kind of all you think about. I've known some people growing up where the fandom becomes the thing of their personality. So like, I am an X-fan becomes the one thing that they have to bring up and like is a part of them. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because while fandom does bring people together, it should be kind of used in moderation.
I think unfortunately there are a lot of people these days, because they're lacking in so many other things, they take fandom and turn it into a personality, and into a very consumerist personality that relies on the currency of affirmation. And so when they don't get that affirmation, because they're lacking in so many other things in their lives, they lash out at people with dissenting views. And it's, you know, it's unfortunate that people have to be like that. I mean, we've gone through in the last decade, you know, issues where, you know, journalists and, you know, game reviewers would get like death threats and other things because they said, you know, whatever game was only an 8 out of 10 or something, which is a very good score, I thought at least. You know, where people get very obsessive and territorial in very negative ways. I've certainly had experiences with that. Many of my friends, many women in my life in particular, have had experiences with that, where they, you know, speak a dissenting view about a video game and then get, yeah, like threats and things like that. And that is, you know, unacceptable.
I think one of the worst things I've ever heard happened was when this has always been something really strange in the Star Wars fandom, because when the Phantom Menace came out, like the guy who voiced and did the mocap for Jar Jar Binks, he was like borderline having like suicidal thoughts, or he straight up was, because there were people like walking up to him in like the conventions, straight up like telling him like, you ruined my childhood. Like, why in the world would you ever walk up to like an actor in a movie and like say that, even though like it was his job? That's something you're always gonna have to deal with when it comes to like a group of people. There's always going to be either a small or even a majority of the people who are there who act like, I don't want to say any curse words here, but they act mean, they act very self-centered, they act very like unempathetic to anyone else's opinion on whatever.
I think it's important to be able to have other things, because so much of us are like more than just one thing when it comes to being people, and being able to express that is a great thing. So when you're obsessing over something, you lock up a lot of sides of yourself, I think, unless there's a way that you can express yourself through multiple things. You know, like if you're in a fandom, can you make fan art and fan music? Can you know, they definitely don't necessarily come hand in hand. Just because you like something doesn't mean that you're obsessed by it. Either way, practice self-care and self-love and present yourself as you are.